Welcome to Finding the Modern Man podcast. Join me, Peter Costa, your health and performance expert and self-leadership coach, as myself and my guests discuss and uncover what it means to be a man in today's society, empowering you to optimize physical, mental, and emotional health in order to create a life with purpose and passion in the changing world that we live in. Welcome back to another episode of Finding the Modern Man podcast. Today, my friend, what I want to take you through is the topic of addiction. And I will be splitting this topic up over 2 episodes because there is a lot that I want to get through, and it's not the most common view of addiction or the most common perception of addiction. And in the first episode here, today, what I want to take you through is more some of the definitions, statistics, information, some of the smaller ways addiction can also express in our lives, not just the extreme ways that we're most commonly viewing them as. In the second episode, then we'll be going through more of the emotional processing side of it, a little more of that self-exploration side, and looking at those parts of us that are involved with addictive behavior and how we can go about reducing that reaction or that craving over time. So today, let's carry on from something I mentioned in a previous episode, talking about how it's socially acceptable now in today's society to glorify substance abuse. And we all know this. I'm sure we've all been in these situations or know someone who may glorify how much they can drink, what trouble they got up to when they were drunk or high on other illicit substances, how much they spent on the pokies, how much they gamble outside of that. These are some of the more common ways that we see addiction playing out in today's society, particularly in Australian culture. I find this is very common, and just because it's become normal, it doesn't mean that it's healthy or it's good or that we should. Because underlying all of that are deeper psycho-emotional pains that we're trying to cover up, that we're trying to avoid. And this is just some of the more out there ways that we see addiction playing out. There are, of course, the not so, how do we put this? Not so extreme ways. Take screens, the screen addictions. How many people are getting caught using their phones while they're driving now? We're addicted to this screen, to our phones, to the way that those screens fire off different parts of our brain to want more. That addictive cycle of wanting more, needing more. We've got pornography, of course, which is very common amongst men. Social media and the validation response from likes. Drinking, recreational drug use, as we mentioned. Even coffee. How many people do you know will glorify or brag about how much coffee that they drink in a day and wear it like a badge of honor? I know one person that has up to 8 a day and is quite proud of that. And it's like, okay, cool. A lot more is going on in the nervous system there, but that's for another discussion. Even dieting. We have so many these days, so many ways of restricted eating that is marketed to us as something that is beneficial or good or healthy. That can be an addiction of its own. Exercise. Often in the gym, you're not sure, or even if you're seeing someone running up the street, you're not sure if they're running for general health because they're of a healthy state of mind, or if they are running because they are addicted or training because they can't stop, they can't live without it, they have to. It's a compulsion. Now, these are some of the more subtle ways that we can see addictive behavior express itself in daily life. And this is not to say that everyone's bad. This is bad if you got those cravings. It's bringing it to light and acknowledging it for ourselves so we can do something about it and get on with the better part of our lives and not have it control us so much. So now let's have a look at this addictive behavior, right? And I'm not talking about whether it's genetic or not. I'm just saying within us, emotionally, what is it doing? At the core of addiction, one of the variables is that it is the role it plays is a behavior of distraction, filling a void, escapism. It is often distracting us from mental or emotional pain, things we don't want to think about, things we shut out, pain that we've felt in the past that we don't want to uncover, unravel, unpack, and deal with. So there's a little part of our minds, of our inner world, that just distracts us and goes, no, don't do that. Go over here. Look at this. Drink that. Eat that. Go train. It's these little things, right? And it's that part of us that's pushing that out. And this often stems from early childhood. Can you think back to a time when you didn't have these addictive behaviors or when they started? Often the way that we grew up between the ages of from when we're in utero to 8 has a big influence on this behavior. If our physical and emotional needs were met or not. And one thing that I do want to cover today and that we'll go into is the A.C.E studies. This was a great longitudinal study that started in the US and has happened in other countries as well. It stands for the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies. Now, this was taken over the last few decades. These studies have been going and compiling information and statistics about adverse experiences, that children experience and how that forms and shapes their life as adults and further down the track. Now, it's estimated that in Australia, 72% of children have been exposed to at least one type of adverse childhood experience, with these children being under 18, either abused or neglected. Now, this includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, the mental emotional abuse, and neglect, which is often not recognized enough. And this is just 72% of those that are known of or reported. So how many more people are living in this state that have these compulsions, these behaviors, that have had these adverse experiences as children? And taking some of the information directly from the A.C.E studies here is children who are abused or neglected are more likely to suffer immediate physical injuries such as cuts, bruises, broken bones, etc. They also have more inclination towards emotional, psychological factors that come into play, such as anxiety or post-traumatic stress. And if you look at the work of someone like Gabor Mate, he will go as far as to say conditions like ADD, ADHD also can stem from these kind of adverse childhood experiences. And over the long term, children who are abused or neglected are also at risk of experiencing future violence, either as a victim or the perpetrator, more inclined to experience substance abuse, sexually transmitted infections, and delayed brain development. They're more likely to achieve a lower educational level, which can lead to limited employment opportunities down the track. So when we have a look at this and take into consideration what we've just covered, how much of the population does this actually apply to? Does it apply to you and your life? Can you see how some of your behaviors have been shaped from early childhood in the home? Because let's face it, a young juvenile mind cannot regulate itself. That's what parents are for. So if they're constantly in a heightened emotional reaction or constantly anxious, or they're experiencing that toxic stress from their environment, the brain's not developing properly, the emotions are not developing properly, the emotions are not being dealt with or cleared through the body as it could be. So then how does this affect our brain development, our social interactions, how we are at school, how we are at learning new things, how we are at progressing and moving forward in our lives? Also, with the A.C.E studies, it shows that chronic abuse may also lead to toxic stress, which can change brain development and increase the risk of problems like post-traumatic stress disorder, learning and attention and memory difficulties. How much does that sound like ADD, ADHD, and the symptoms of those? Different behavioral things that kids get put onto medication for, or they're just thought of as being bad, thought of as can't control themselves. Well, no, they can't, because their nervous system is so heightened, it's just pinging off the radar constantly. So how can they regulate themselves? How can they concentrate? Can you see this in your life? If you're a father, can you see this in your kids? Now, I'm not saying that you're an abusive parent, but the way that we've been brought up and the way that we've developed, sometimes there are just links in the chain missing to having better adjusted children as well. And these are things that we can alter in ourselves. And if you are a father or a parent, in our kids as well. So I just want to go through a couple of these definitions of abuse as well, because this I found very fascinating and interesting, really breaks things down to understand them better and the nuances to so then we can change that and we can alter that and get on a better course of action. So emotional abuse. This is from the A.C.E studies as well. Behavior that adversely affects a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. It includes verbal abuse such as name-calling, threats, criticism, as well as nonverbal behavior such as neglect, rejection, or withholding love and affection. How many of our stories include elements of that? Not saying all of them, but even just one of those on a regular basis. You know, how many of us were yelled at, threatened? I don't know about a lot of other homes and cultures, but I know it's very common within the Southern European culture. You get yelled at, you get threatened. And it's not that the parent was meaning to follow through or was meaning to be abusive. It's just the way that they knew how to express what they were feeling at the time. Because let's face it, as kids, we are pretty annoying. Even as adults, we can be very irritating and it can put a lot of stress. If you're a parent, you know how frustrating it can be trying to deal with everyday life, the responsibilities of being a man and an adult, and then the responsibilities of a child as well. So it's not saying that we're doing bad things. It's like, okay, let's observe and see where we can pick up our game and improve. The next was child neglect. This I found very important as well. The persistent failure to meet a child's basic physical or psychological needs, likely to result in a serious impairment of the child's health or development. Now, neglect isn't necessarily your parents just leaving you alone to your own devices. It can be they were just absorbed in whatever they were doing, be it a workaholic parent, Be it, I guess a lot of men face this in previous generations, not knowing how to connect or how to be emotionally attuned to their kids when their kids were upset. How many of us were just told, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Don't be a pussy, don't be a girl. Boys don't cry. Okay, so we're dealing with those two categories that we just mentioned, tied in together. And then what was it? Go cry to your mother, go to your room. Or was it? That includes that rejection, that includes that neglect of the emotional state and not having someone there who is attuned to our needs, to what we were going through. Because let's face it, we often carry an adult mentality and expectation and put them onto an undeveloped juvenile mind and nervous system. Those two things can't go together. We need to come down to the kids' level, which is often what we didn't have. And I chose to cover those two in particular because I feel there's a lot more exposure with physical abuse, sexual abuse, but the emotional and the neglect. How many of us had parents that would just, when they were done with work, just zone out after dinner, watch TV, don't bother me. Or the ones that wanted you out of the house for the day. Maybe they couldn't cope. Maybe they couldn't deal with their lives. And understandably so, because in previous generations, I want us to all remember this. In previous generations, our parents didn't have the resources, the knowledge, or the access to information in order to change. The culture was different. The generations were different. Society was more closed, where there wasn't as much travel. There wasn't the internet to be able to pull information from. So they may not have meant to be abusive parents. And I'm sure you're not either. If you're watching these kind of podcasts, if you're listening to this kind of information, I know you're a good man. I know there's a good man in there. Sometimes we just are we have these layers of circumstance and our own experiences and upbringings that just get in the way. And that's okay, because that's what we're here to change. Because it may not be abusive parenting, but we may not be present, whether it's with kids, partners, staff. Often bosses are just so stressed out and so caught up in their own stress loop, survival mode, in their own layers, that they can't attune to staff or communicate effectively or hear, acknowledge, and see them. Wherever you are dealing with humans, this is the same case, because we are all human. We all need these basic needs met. Particularly looking at how we deal with people under the age of 8. Because at that point in time, everything goes in. Kids are sponges and everything is fact. There's no jokes. There's no sarcasm. Everything is fact. How they react internally is a fact to them. So now have a think about what we've just covered. Write some of these points down. Have a look in your own life where what you experienced as a child, what your children, partner have experienced, what your staff have experienced, and what they're experiencing from you as well. Because this is a critical part to being able to turn things around. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode, is get on that train, get on that process, okay? Because this is not just a one-stop fix-all kind of thing. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's a part of the process. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that you got value out of it. Please go away, write some of these things down. There's a great power in writing. Think about these stats. Look up the ACE studies, adverse childhood experiences. Get some more information for yourself, because the more equipped we are, the more effectively we can turn around generations around us, below us, and above us, and create a better world and be the men we are meant to be. Thank you very much. See you next episode. Just a friendly reminder that what we discussed today does not constitute personalized advice. If you're planning on making significant changes to your life, creating a pathway suited to your specific needs is recommended. If this is you, feel free to get in touch, book an appointment, as I would love to help you reach your goals and your version of success. And as always, I look forward to seeing you next episode.